Hello, comrades. So today we're talking about Coffee Break Italian. We're doing a review of Coffee Break Italian. And so if you don't know, Coffee Break Languages is a podcast. Basically, it's a website with a series of podcasts, and they have different languages. So they have Italian, French, Spanish, Scottish Gaelic, Japanese. They have a Swedish course. And I just decided to do a review of Italian because I haven't seen anyone really talk about it. So a long time ago, I did the Duolingo course in Italian. I speak some related languages. I've studied a lot of languages and linguistics in general, and so I think I was in a pretty good position to be able to learn pretty quickly. I already knew a lot of what they were kind of already teaching, so I might not actually be the ideal person to be doing this experiment. First, I do want to say it is a free course, so that goes into my analysis here. It's something you can use. I think it might be helpful for certain beginners. But if you're like an intermediate Italian student or maybe an intermediate Spanish student, unless you really have trouble listening, I don't think I'd recommend it. But it is free. There's kind of bonus material you can pay for if you either just really like it or you want to support them, which is a legitimate thing. I would encourage anyone to do so. And so it's broken down into seasons, and there's some bonus stuff beyond the seasons, but there are 3 seasons, and I only listened to the first season. It's 40 episodes. Each one is about half an hour. So we're looking at 20 hours. And if you think about it, 20 hours of course material isn't enough to get you to like A1. Like, literally, if you take a class for 20 hours in a new language, at least according to like the FSI statistics, you will not, that is the Foreign Language Institute statistics, the US government, you won't, as a native English speaker, be able to reach A1 in Italian. you know, Maybe that's a little overblown, but I just want to frame this in terms of setting expectations. I don't think this is going to be something that will teach you all of the necessary Italian, but I do think it will be a good starting place for a lot of people. And there are a few things I like about it. I like that it's really beginner friendly. So if you don't know where you are going at all, you don't know what to do, it's a good place to start. It's audio based. It's not too intense, so maybe if you have a commute, you can listen to it. Maybe while you're washing the dishes. If you are newer and you're a bit distracted, you might want to listen to each episode kind of twice, something that holds to about 40 hours. I know I tend to focus a lot on the written form of a language, and that can be difficult once I get to a kind of upper intermediate stage where I still have some struggles listening and understanding. I'll get to a point where, I can read a book, I can hold a conversation, but a lot of times when I'm just hearing people talk, especially if it's very fast, if it's very slang heavy, I run into trouble. That is a place where I'm always lagging. And so I think if you do kind of focus on this, you'll avoid the problems that I have. And so it will, build it up. It's very much focused, at least the first season. I only listened to the first season, but if you're gonna start, I think that's really hopefully a representative sample. Maybe the second season, the third season, completely different, but I would doubt it. But it's very much focused on people who are learning Italian for traveling. And so that might not be your biggest interest, but if you do want to speak Italian generally, it's stuff you're going to have to learn at some point, and so that might as well be the first thing you focus on. Maybe, in an ideal scenario, there'd be other things that would be more useful to you, strictly speaking, but I think it does a great aspect of teaching you basic Italian grammar and phrases for traveling. And the thing that's really cool about it that I really loved, and so the first 30 episodes or so are pretty didactic. It's about teaching you. And so they talk a lot in English, and they explain things. And then in the final, because how it works, this is for the Coffee Break Italian series, and I believe a lot of the other series. They have the main host, who is a native English speaker and a very high level Italian speaker. They have an Italian speaker and someone learning Italian but who's familiar with some other languages, who I think did some of the other series with them. And so in the final 10 episodes, they go, all 3 of them, to Italy and they record some of their conversations. And so it's really cool because you can hear those conversations real world conversations of the kind of things, like ordering in a restaurant, trying to figure out travel plans, booking a hotel, that kind of thing, basic things you might actually need, and they record it and it's real and it's live. And I think that's really important because first off, that's just a great way to learn. You're hearing real Italian, which means that when you try and do those things, you'll be a little better prepared to do it in reality. But also, I think there's an aspect of kind of a confidence boost that's very necessary that you see after your 30 episodes and you put in the effort. Especially if you're a new person, you're taking notes, you're really studying hard. Maybe you're listening to every episode more than once, and you hear these episodes, these final 10 episodes of the season, and you hear what you can actually do. And they aren't, discussing Dante. They aren't doing like literary analysis. They aren't writing, physics on papers on astrophysics or anything like that. But they are having a real conversation. I think that is super important. That is very valuable to both learn how to be able to do and to see and understand and see that you can do it, that it is possible. Because I think that is one of the things a lot of times new language learners get caught up in when they're trying to learn a language is that it feels impossible. You open up a book and it has a bunch of grammar rules and it feels like a bunch of rules and they have a lot of words and you can remember what the words are, but you can't get it to feel natural. And I always think of, I'm stealing this from someone. I don't remember who said this, but someone said this about German, that they found it really weird when German children spoke because it reminded them that it was a real language and not something that was made up to, torture college students or high school students. You know, uh, when you learn another language, it is a real language, and the sooner you get that, the sooner you see not just that other people speak it naturally, but you yourself are capable of having that kind of interaction with the language. I think the sooner you can do that, the better. And so, if you're a new person to Italian, to languages in general, and you're looking for something and you want an easy, free decision to go with, I would recommend this. It could be like a 5-star experience as like the first thing you do to get an introduction. I think it's a lot more useful than something like Duolingo, where it can feel like a game and it can be a little harder to fit into your life. And you might have like 5 minutes every day, but it never really like adds up to that much. It's easier if you have half an hour. You sit down, you listen to something. I mean, you take notes, you pay attention for half an hour, and you do that episode and you make that part of your routine, even if you're not doing it as often, even if you're not doing it literally every day. I think that is incredibly valuable. The other case where you might want to use it is if you've studied some other languages, you feel pretty comfortable, but like me, you tend to focus a lot on the written form, and you would want to just have something that's easy, maybe while you're doing other things to listen to, kind of make your dishwashing time or your running exercise time or your commute just a little more productive. And if you are familiar with like other languages like French or Spanish, you don't have to quite pay as much attention. I think you're a little better equipped to just remember everything. Everything will feel a little familiar, and you already kind of know a lot of the things that they're teaching. Like when they start talking about conjugation, this won't be like completely new to you. It'll already kind of fit into a paradigm that already exists in your mind. But I also wanted to take a moment to talk about what I would do if I just wanted to learn Italian, like from my level at the moment, what I would do. And I have two books here. So I have Stencil Italian Grammar. I'd probably give this a read through, see if there's anything kind of notable. I'd probably make some flashcards if there are weird things, and so I'm trying to figure out how many pages of information is this. And there's probably a bunch of stuff, I'd kind of read through once and forget about it, and then come back to it once it was useful. Just like, I wouldn't really learn it. I just learn it enough to remember that I had learned it, if that makes sense. So when I see it in the wild, I can come back to it. So it's under 100 pages of like actual information. And then I have an Italian graded reader, and so I'd read through this after going through the grammar, I see if it made sense. I'd look up a bunch of words. I think it has a lot of notes on words, and I can recognize a lot of cognates, and I've already studied some, and so I'd probably be able to read a fair bit and learn a bunch of new words. The other thing I think I would do is I just look into the phonology. And so I think when you are, especially if you are, doing it from a kind of written perspective, it can be easy to get into bad habits when it comes into how you think of the language and pronunciation. And so there are kind of two things in Italian that I'm kind of vaguely aware of. That would be like the first go to like problematic pronunciation things. So they have double consonants. So if you have two consonants in the middle, you really have to, pronounce both of those. It's like there's like a difference between like siete and siete. And I'd really try and drill that in. I try and get accustomed to it. I'm not that good at it, as you can tell. And that was something they were pretty aware of in the podcast in Coffee Break Italian, which I think is useful, especially because you are hearing it, so you don't have to pay as much attention, depending on your ability. I'm pretty bad with that, but I know some people can kind of hear things and have a very good ear, and they can reproduce it very well. I have to learn it more explicitly, more consciously. And the other thing I'd look into would be the vowels, because there are seven vowels, because there's an open E. So there's and and I'd really try and figure out when they use each one. And I'd study the difference. And I know there's a lot of regional differences, but I know in like Spanish, there's just five vowels, so you don't have to worry about that. But in Portuguese, there is, and that was something that kind of there is that distinction between and eh, and that was one of those things where I got to like an intermediate level. I was reading books, I was watching movies, talking to people, listening to music, but I still like didn't have that basic pronunciation thing down. And it also comes up with the O's, where there's O and ah, which for me is a much clearer difference, but is something I want to study, figure out what the regional difference is, if there's a way when I see a word, if I can tell how it's pronounced, pay more attention to maybe where the stress is, kind of do an explicit account of the pronunciation. And then afterwards, I'd look at a site like Easy Italian, which is a YouTube series. They're easy languages, and so for Easy Italian, and I think a lot of others, they do street interviews and have subtitles in Italian and English. And they have a podcast who I think is just in Italian, which is great. And I start looking for more kind of audio resources. And I do it kind of the other way. I'd really kind of focus on learning the written form. And then afterwards, I'd be expanding out into learning to understand the language. And that's just a personal preference. This isn't like the way you have to do it. It was a great resource if anyone is interested. If you think Easy Italian is right for you, I wanted to put something out into the world to say that this is a good thing. And it's getting pretty dark, so it's cold out as well. So good night, good day, good potato.